Let's now look at the grade 5 social studies, life on the plantation. Hi 5th grade scholars, last week's lesson saw the Africans being forcibly taken from their homes to the Caribbean through the Middle Passage. This week's lesson will examine the lifestyle, needs, and experiences of the African slaves and the Europeans on the plantation. Learning goal: you should be able to identify similarities and differences in the lifestyle of Africans and the Europeans on the plantations. Background information: once the slaves got to the plantation, the estates on which crops such as coffee, sugar, and tobacco are grown, they were given names. English names primarily, the ones of their owners. They were forced to learn a new language in an informal way. The slaves had no rights. They were now the property of the plantation owner. During the day, the slave children and adults worked from sunrise to sunset, 6 days per week. The majority of the slaves worked in the fields planting and cutting sugarcane, but others manufactured sugar and some worked in the great house doing domestic chores. On the plantation, slaves lived in small cottages with thatched roofs. The cottages often had earthen floors and were furnished with only a bed, table, and a bench. The white slave drivers or foremen made sure that the slaves did not stop working by beating and punishing those who did not obey instructions. The planters pursued an elaborate lifestyle. They lived in large cut stone houses called great houses, dressed in fine clothing, and ate enormous meals. Getting interested? Engage. Research the difference between the lifestyle of the African slaves and the plantation owners. So you're supposed to complete the following. In the house, the slaves dash and the English dash. On the plantations, the slaves dash but the overseers dash. The slaves wore dash while the slavers wore dash. The slaves ate dash but the slave masters ate dash. Explore. Do you think life for African slaves was similar in any way to the life of the English? Read the account of two different persons who lived on the plantation. Fufu, a slave. My name is Fufu. I'm 10 years old. I was born on a plantation in Industry St. James. I live with my mother, grandmother, and older sister, Cookie. My father lives on another plantation somewhere else in Jamaica. The conch shell is sounded every morning and signals us to wake up. We eat a minimal breakfast and head out to work. I work in the fields with my grandmother pulling weeds from the roots of sugar cane. My mother works in the field carrying bundles of cane. Cookie works long hours in the great house, cooking and washing for the masters. We don't have much free time, but on Saturday afternoon and on Sunday, we work on our small provision grounds, which has vegetables, yam, banana, plantain, and cocoa. On Sunday, we go to the market to sell our provisions. I really like Sundays, as it's the only day I get a chance to play with my friends. We tell stories and guess riddles. Mr. Smith, a slave master. So now we have the account of a slave master. I am John Gray. I was born in Bristol, England, but I came to Jamaica to live. I own a plantation in Industry St. James on which I cultivate sugar cane, which produces sugar. There are now 360 slaves on my plantation, as recently I bought 30 more slaves because my plantation was doing so well. I rise early in the morning and the house slaves prepare my bath, cook and serve my meals, and pick me up after when I am done. The foreman and I inspect the plantation every morning while my slaves are toiling. I like when they work long and hard. This provides me with more profit. My wife hosts lavish parties. They wear elaborate costumes and eat fish, pork, mutton, beef, sweets, and fruits. These parties give us a chance to flaunt our wealth. Read the statements below and state whether they belong to Fufu or John Gray. Number 1. The English settlers benefited greatly from cultivating crops such as sugarcane. That would be for John Gray. Slaves did not have a wide variety of food to eat. That would belong to Fufu. Slaves worked long hours and were always answerable to their masters. Fufu. Based on the account, what were the needs of the slaves and the Europeans on the plantation? Based on the accounts, what were the needs of slaves and the Europeans on the plantations? So, you're going to need food, clothing, and shelter. How did they provide for those needs? So the slaves would work. The master would provide as little as possible to them. They would have to do their own provision grounds, but they would prepare the things. When the masters would sell the sugarcane, they would be able to buy the things that they wanted. Which group do you think had the greatest need? Why? I think the greatest need would have been for the slaves, because they would have been getting very little from the master, and just like everybody else, they need food, shelter, and clothing. What do you understand? Explain. Why did the English settlers need to own plantations in the Caribbean? Well, they needed to do this because it was an opportunity for them to make money in another way that they could not do in Europe. In Europe, you don't grow sugarcane in Europe because sugarcane is a tropical crop. People who wanted to make money in Europe could come to the Caribbean and they have another way, another opportunity to make money. Next one, why were there more slaves than English settlers on the plantation? Because you needed a large workforce to produce sugar, and the Englishmen were not the ones who were producing sugar. They were not working day to day, so you wouldn't have needed more of them. Extend. Use the account of Fufu or Mr. Gray along with other information to compare the lifestyle of slaves and English on the plantation. Lifestyle, work, type of work, time of work, etc. So we know that the Englishman will not be working all day in the fields. He will not be doing the heavy work. He'll not be working for long hours. However, the slaves had to do the hard work, the heavy work, and they worked all day. Food, the English would be able to eat lavish food. However, the blacks or the slaves would just eat, very common foods, their yams and so on. Tools, the English would have guns and so on to make sure if anybody tried to escape, they could shoot them, while the slaves would have basic tools, farming tools such as the cutlass and maybe a hoe. Entertainment, the English would have parties, while the slaves would only have like John Kuno, costume parades and so on at special times in the year. And to entertain themselves, they would also sing on the plantations and so on. Clothing, the English would have costumes and fancy clothes, while the slaves would just have the normal, basic clothes that they would wear from day to day, and maybe a one suit, their Sunday best. Shelter, the English would live in the great house, while the slaves would live in barracks, which had thatch roofs and were in no way as lavish or elaborate as the cut stone mansions that the slavers lived in. Extended learning, carry out research to find out if there were plantations in your community. you might be surprised. So yes, we had one very close by. In Mineral Heights here, we have the Halsall Great House, which is less than 5 minutes away.